Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is AWS On Air Startup, where every single Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. UTC, or in some cases, 4 a.m. in Australia. I don't know I forget the name of the time zone, but it's 4 a.m. where you are. We come live and we give you tips to help you to be able to build your startup in AWS. My name is Jillian Ford, and I am a startup solutions architect. And I'm here with the absolute trooper coming in from Australia on all things fintech, Daniel. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jillian. Firstly, thanks for having me here. It's really good to take part in this little initiative. So, my name is Daniel Werjo. I'm a startup solutions architect based here down under in Australia. I'm specialized on fintech startups. So prior to AWS, I was a startup CTO in the financial services space in wealth management and what they call superannuation here, which is kind of like your retirement income system, like 401k in the US. So, yeah, really looking forward to discussing with you all things fintech today.
Wow. So there's really a lot that you can definitely offer startups in terms of advice for building their startup as a former CTO and as someone who works with startups. So this is great. So I know we've got some people coming in. I see on the chat. Hi, Santosh Kumar. So glad that you're here joining us today.
I
Um,
see.
yeah. Um, so, of course, if you're joining us in the chat, you can post your questions about today's topic. We want to make this really interactive. That's why we do this as a live and it's not scripted. There's no PowerPoint. We really want to make this conversational about the topic of the day related to startups. And today is going to be about fintech startups. We've got another LinkedIn user. Hi from LinkedIn. Fantastic. Glad to see that people are starting to come in. Alvaro, there we go. We've got some people coming in. Prince, fantastic. Thomas, awesome. There we go. Oh, so glad to see people starting to come in. So now that we're starting to see some people in the chats, the reason why we do this as a live stream again is because this is live, and we want to be able to answer your questions about building something related to building a startup on AWS. Today's being fintech, but of course, I like to start every week off with an icebreaker to get your fingers warmed up in the chat. So if you could leave in the chat, what is your favorite emoji? I've seen some hand waves. So favorite emoji, drop your favorite emoji into the chat. We've got some hand wave emojis so far. Let's see. What is your favorite emoji? Isaac from Chicago, Gary from Belfast, Omar. Let's see. Sarathi. Daniel, do you have a favorite emoji?
Yeah, I have a big favorite. My favorite is by far like the nerdy kind of glasses emoji. Yeah, I had a lot of fun when that emoji first got released.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Most endearing ones, I think. I just love that. Yeah, the emoji has like this really cute two kind of front tooth as the smile. So yeah, I really love that one.
That's a good one. Yeah, I always really like the cat one with like the heart eyes. I like the nerd one too. Ismail. Yep, the
Yeah,
nerd ones. We got the
the smells got it.
yep. Love it. I love all these emojis, and I love seeing where everyone's from. This global community that we've had. South Africa in the house. The crying emoji. You can't go wrong with that. Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much. So again, post your questions. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. We're talking about fintech startups, how to build your startup in AWS. and tips for fintech startups. All the other previous episodes that we've done of AWS on our startup are on the AWS Events YouTube channel. And you'll also see them if you go on LinkedIn and you look at the previous posts, the video post specifically, you'll be able to see all the other episodes that we've done. So we've covered a lot of things, and there's more coming at you this year on all things helping you build your startup in AWS. So awesome. Let's start out with fintech, and specifically, Daniel, what are really the top 3 things that you think that fintech startups need to think about when they're building an AWS?
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I think probably the primary thing that I see, when looking at fintech startups versus maybe startups more broadly, is this requirement to be secure and compliant. A lot of fintechs are entrusted with, people's money or people's kind of financial well-being. So it's really important that, if you are building on AWS, that you're focused on the sort of security and compliance side, in addition to just, moving fast, breaking things. In fintech, you probably shouldn't break anything. And so I think that balance, startups find quite challenging. And at AWS, we're working on a lot of different programs, different thought leadership in terms of how to help fintech startups build securely and in a compliant way in AWS. Maybe the second thing is really around kind of scaling your fintech startups. With fintech startups, a lot of the time you still need to integrate the kind of like a legacy system or like a core banking platform, so systems that are potentially, not as performant as some of the systems that you deal with in the kind of modern architecture. So thinking about how to handle that is really important. And then maybe last, and there's a lot to cover, I think, in fintech, is unlocking value from your data. So that's really about, all the data that you're capturing from your customers and your business operations. How do you set up that data foundation and then unlock value either through analytics or AI and machine learning, and really try to differentiate your product with those capabilities.
Yeah, those are really great call outs. And there's some other call outs in the chat I want to be able to call out. So Omar said that he's building his startup in AWS. That is awesome. And there's a great question here from, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Adafularan. Does AWS have a list of recommendations, a checklist of what to do as a fintech? There's a couple of things. So maybe Daniel, do you want to start with some things that come to mind?
Yeah, there's a few things. The first thing that comes to mind, when building really anything on AWS, is the well-architected review. So I love the well-architected review, as it gives you sort of these frameworks and dimensions to kind of think about whenever you're building on AWS. So things like operational efficiency or security. There's a set of questions there that you can sort of answer, and when you're building an architecture or building on AWS, you can kind of start framing your mind in those sort of dimensions. And then underneath that, there's also a financial services, what we call lens. So within a well-architected review, there are different lenses, which is, I guess, just different views or perspectives depending on the industry or use cases. So I do like the financial services lens quite a bit. It is more tailored maybe towards larger financial services companies, but as a fintech startup, you're still in that industry typically. So I do like that resource quite a bit. There's a few more resources, but maybe I'll go back to you as well, Julian, to see if you've seen anything that you find interesting in the space.
Yeah, this is also related to, I think, one thing that we were going to cover later on, and it perfectly ties in, is the startup security baseline, which isn't fintech specific. It's really, think of it like a security checklist of either A, when you're just getting started with your startup and before you launch publicly to your customers, you want to make sure, hey, do I have the basics down? And that's what the startup security baseline is. If you just do a search for startup security baseline, you'll see it in the AWS documentation, and go through that like a checklist in your AWS account to make sure you're ready. And if you already have your startup that's launched, maybe you've got a few customers to maybe hundreds or thousands or more, you still want to look at that just to make sure, okay, do I have the basics down? And then from there, you can always go and improve your security on top of that. I mean, I've been here for 5.5 years and I've never seen a company really of any size who has, where security isn't a constant and never-ending improvement process. There's always something to get better at. So it's definitely something to look at. I would say that as one call out. I love the well architected call outs that you did as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I can chime in a bit more about the startup security baseline. So, at least in down under, I would love to get your thoughts around what you're doing in North America, Jillian. Is that you were running a security baseline clinic
Oh,
every month to help, fintech startups. Go through the security baseline checklist. You can sort of bring your own AWS account, and you can kind of go through all the controls, which outlines what you need to do on your both your account, but also on your specific workload. So we found that to be quite effective. There is, I think, around 30 controls to get through in the security baseline. So you know. We recommend all startups to kind of go through all of it. And as part of those controls, there are a few AWS services that we recommend as well, like AWS Guard Duty, which provides threat kind of intelligence on your AWS account. That's quite automated. So startups definitely love that because they get insights and security kind of insights automatically. Um, things like CloudTrail, making sure that's turned on. So anything that happens in your AWS account that's logged and visible, and in case the powers that be or regulators come knocking, you have that handy. So yeah, and also trusted advisor, which is surprisingly not a familiar service for a lot of startups, but it's one of my favorite ones because it's kind of like giving you this basic health check on your account. And for me, I have it like front and center in my AWS console. So I just have that quick health check on my AWS account with Trusted Advisor. So yeah, that's probably my comment on the security baseline.
yeah, and I love what you just said there earlier, because I want to pull on that thread about the compliance and security, because a lot of times these fintech startups, maybe they're working with regulators, or if we're going after larger enterprise customers within the fintech space, there's certain regulatory compliance standards, whatever country that startup is in. And so, I mean, I know we've got a global audience, so we're not going to be able to cover specifics to your country, but there's still some general common themes that wherever you are can be applicable. And then, of course, you'll want to then look up the specifics to your country. So maybe, Daniel, when a startup comes to you and they're like, and this is common, I guess I hear this a lot, is like, all right, I've got this compliance and regulatory and security, like I've gone through the startup security baseline. Really, what's next for me to be able to make sure that I'm really ready to be able to bring on this maybe integration with this big company, or be more secure? and adhere to these standards?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We do get it a fair bit,
Yeah,
and as a startup, you're probably focused on a lot of things. You
yeah,
might be hiring, fundraising. So I think there's definitely competing priorities,
yeah,
and sometimes security is driven. Like you said, on landing that big customer or sort of compliance requirements, almost like a tap on the shoulder and say, hey, you probably should do this. But I think probably a good mindset to kind of reframe is, can security be kind of thought of more proactively? Is
yes,
it something that helps you earn trust with your customers? Is it something that helps you kind of be ready for a capital raise? Because investors these days, they're quite discerning, and they sort of want to make sure that you have a good security foundation. So I
yes,
would probably reframe that slightly differently in terms of looking at security. Being reactive is, probably okay as a startup, but ideally you should be a lot more proactive. Yeah, in terms of compliance requirements, at AWS, we always start with the shared responsibility model.
good call
So
out.
yeah, to kind of give an overview of that. It's really, which party is responsible for which. So AWS is typically responsible for security off the cloud. So things like the hardware and a lot of the um, things that effectively the startup is outsourcing to AWS. And then the startup is security in the cloud, so how the kind of application is configured and set up, all the identities that you sort of set up. And yeah, another way to think about it is that AWS provides you with all the security tools and configuration, and AWS will enforce that. But as a startup, you still need to be mindful about what inputs you're putting into the cloud to make sure all your data and identities, workloads, etc., are secure. So it's definitely something that you have to keep in mind when thinking about security. And from that perspective, it works the same with compliance. So
Yep.
there's a portal inside AWS called AWS Artifact, which is like a self-service compliance documents portal. So that's really handy when dealing with regulators or auditors, because you can see the compliance posture of AWS. And it's correct me if I'm wrong, Julian, but there's probably around like 80 or more compliance programs that AWS is compliant with now. So hopefully that should cover most regulations uh, around the world. That's a starting point for kind of
Mhm.
AWS's security. And then on top of that, that's where, you'll need to look at things like the security baseline, or we have another resource called the security reference architecture as well, that
Mm.
can provide you with some guidance around, hey, how should I set up my security on top of AWS, and go through all those security considerations.
Yeah, that's a great call outs. And I will also add, for automated compliance, there is AWS Audit Manager. So there are some that are predefined, certain compliance standards. And then there's also an option to be able to create a customized, I forget the name of the actual term, but you can create your own customization based on maybe the compliance requirements that, if they're not already included in already Audit Manager by default. So that's one. And then AWS config can also be utilized to be able to make sure that at an automated level, the people who are using the AWS account, they are adhering to those practices that are, one, just best practices within AWS, and two, any of those that are also specifically related to any of the compliance standards. So those are some things to also look at. Daniel, let's talk about processing payments and financial data. So, what are some things that really you see there that fintech startups are using to do that in AWS?
Yeah, I think in terms of payments, it is, I would say, one of the most complex fintech kind of sub-vertical, if you call it that, or segment. And it's really because of the kind of integrations. Uh, so integrating to kind of different payment networks and payment rails, I think, is quite challenging. There's a need to be extremely resilient, so you know you don't see, especially in the kind of Western world, you don't see kind of payment terminals or payment systems go down. Like, people just expect payments to be 24/7 reliable. If it sort of doesn't work, that's kind of a few and far between type event. And then yeah, just the cryptography and security requirements there is even almost a higher level than some of the compliance requirements that you typically see from an organizational level. So the payments industry, like PCI, payments card industry, have its own kind of specific rigorous standards on that front, in terms of how to manage that those sensitive payment information. And yeah, and on the AWS side, we do provide a number of different services to manage these sensitive keys or tokens. So if you're an application developer, you might be aware of AWS Secrets Manager, or the key management service. And that's one service that is used quite a lot to really manage anything that's like sensitive, any
Yep.
credentials or any kind of uh, keys or tokens. You can use uh, those services to manage it. And how it works underneath is that there's a separate isolated hardware security module
Mm,
that ensures that, I guess, those keys never leave that a secure and isolated environment, so it doesn't get commingled with your other services. And you can kind of manage those keys securely. And yeah, an interesting one that a lot of startups are not 100% familiar with is also AWS Nitro Enclave, um, which is it's a very interesting service. So it comes with Amazon EC2, and it's this secure, isolated compute environment that you can use to also manage those keys, potentially at higher scale. So we see a lot of startups maybe starting with um, KMS and Secrets Manager, and then as they scale, they might want more those types of cryptographic attestation, or more kind of advanced key management capabilities, and that's where they use um, our more advanced services like Nitro Enclave. Is that something that you see as well, Jillian, in North America?
yeah, I definitely do, and it's a good call out saying about about Nitro Enclaves, because I see the same thing where I think it's just something that not everyone's aware of. So it's a great call out, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who maybe have payments use case, other security requirements, and also kind of leads to another question that we were both talking about offline, but someone actually asked this. So, DeFi tech, is this something that you're seeing specifically with the customers that you're working with in finance? I know we have a lot of people doing, I guess, other parts of distributed finance, but yeah, what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a really good segue, I think. Yeah, I just delivered a talk on Web3 and DeFi, actually, at our
Wow.
Sydney summit. And yeah, it's a very interesting space. So when people think about, I guess, AWS, maybe like decentralization doesn't come to mind, but the way we see it is, a lot of startups in Web3, a lot of the parts in their application is actually in the kind of more like the Web2 or traditional space, where they still need those foundational web application building blocks. So definitely in DeFi, you can still use like an AWS compute option. You can still use S3 and CloudFront or like Amplify to develop your DeFi front end to connect to the blockchain. And on the blockchain side, AWS does have AWS managed blockchain, um, which supports Ethereum as like a fully managed blockchain solution. And in the marketplace, there's also other blockchain clients that you can spin up. So even alternative kind of layer one blockchains like Avalanche, you can start spinning up through the marketplace. And in terms of the Web3 ecosystem, AWS is partnered with a number of different like node providers and APIs as a service. So yeah, if you want to enter the DeFi world and connect to the blockchain, you can definitely use AWS to build your core application, and then use some of those blockchain services to connect to the blockchain.
I love those call outs. Yeah. And there's definitely some resources, I would say, blog posts. I'm sure if you just look up in the AWS blog and search for blockchain or distributed finance, yeah, see what you find, because we do have a couple of reference architectures around at least blockchain, and there might be some on distributed finance. So that's
Yeah.
awesome that you did that talk. Go ahead.
Speaking about key management as well, in the traditional kind of payment space, you do have these standards that were founded by your Visas, Mastercard, around kind of tokenization and encryption, around how those kind of payment data needs to be handled. In the blockchain space, you still have kind of similar cryptographic requirements, and the same services actually, like AWS KMS and Nitro Enclave, are the foundational services that you would use to secure your keys in Web3. So there's a saying, it's like, not your keys, not your crypto. And if you're building like a Web3 startup on AWS, that's something that I definitely see as being a big part of it. Is really, how do you securely manage your blockchain wallets? And yeah, the way I kind of think about it is, yeah, so a wallet is just a pair of cryptographic keys. So you can use any key management solutions to handle that.
Love it. Yeah, everyone keep bringing in your questions around fintech startups. How do you build a fintech startup in AWS? I see some of them, and I'm saving them. I'm going to definitely get to them at different points in the conversation. But I also want to make sure that there's some material that we want to just like be able to talk about, to make sure that all of you here have something that you can take away with. So yeah, let's talk about, we've talked about encryption, some of these architectures that maybe you're seeing to really help with a fintech architecture. So maybe we can start with the first one of event-driven architectures. How are you seeing fintech startups use event-driven architecture? And maybe we should actually first define, what does event-driven architecture actually mean?
Yeah, I think with event-driven architectures, I'm seeing it a lot with fintechs that want to integrate to different kind of third-party APIs or core banking platforms, or different systems that are perhaps not as performant as I mentioned earlier in the show, to like modern architectures, or they're like rate limited, for example, so it can only process a certain amount of transactions per second. And yeah, event-driven architectures, which is really the idea that you would, I guess, decouple kind of the event. So when something happens, you sort of have like a messaging service to sort of declare that event, and then once that event has happened, you have like a separate process, maybe like a consumer on like a AWS Lambda or a Fargate to consume those events and then manage it in a sorry, like a loosely coupled way. So it's very useful for things like third party integrations where perhaps there's some like performance limitations that you need to control. So rate limiting is like a key one. Make sure you don't process your events if your downstream systems can't handle it. So protecting those downstream systems, and also from a user experience side as well. You want to provide this really seamless and fast experience for your users. So you might want to just kind of, um, you know, capture the event. So the user has done something, and then the processing, you might want to just separate that out and, maybe process it in the background. And provide your users with a nice user experience.
I like that. Yeah. Event-driven architectures. And this is kind of, we're going to go back to the more specific for fintech, but but there was a question that came here that's related to this thread of event-driven, some of the architectures we're talking about. So someone asked, is this possible scale an advertising analytics platform? So a lot of these architecture patterns, even though we're talking about them with respect to fintech, they could be used for other industries as well. So event driven is really a common pattern that can be used for,
You name it.
you have an event. Yeah, I mean, like almost anything, right? I mean, there's so many different use cases that can be made into an event-driven type of architecture. So for this person's question about advertising and analytics, advertising absolutely is definitely a use case. Analytics, we're definitely going to cover on another episode. I'm just looking at the calendar here when we have analytics, and that will be on June 13th. We're going to be talking about analytics, same time, specifically. So definitely, Yaroslav, come back on June 13th and bring your questions for that, because that's when we've got for that one. But yeah, so just for everyone here, even though maybe if you don't necessarily have a fintech startup, you're not working one, you don't have one in mind, maybe you want to start a startup that's not fintech, whatever it is. Yeah, these can be used for all different kinds of aspects. But so okay, we went event-driven architectures. Oh, and analytics was the next one, really, and machine learning was on our list. How
Yeah.
that
So
worked
we
out?
can, I guess maybe to just close the loop on event-driven architectures as well, I'd say that, once your engineering team scales to maybe beyond, I don't know what you're seeing, Jillian, but, typically maybe like around 3 to 5 kind of squads, then suddenly it becomes quite cumbersome to kind of deploy into this one monolithic code base. So we're seeing a lot of take up in terms of event driven architectures when you sort of maybe raise your like between like series A and series B, maybe when you raise your kind of series B venture capital round, definitely that's where a lot of teams scramble to say, hey, let's what are all the events in my system, and can we structure applications where we can process these events independently and have like separate teams handling these events. So we definitely see that quite a bit.
Yeah, I like that. So talk more about some of the you said that Redshift serverless, and really how you've been seeing some of the fintech startups being able to use that. I mean, we should first start off with what is with Redshift, because we got people of all different
Yeah.
levels of experience with AWS.
Yeah, so Redshift is a cloud data warehouse. So think of it like a database that's purpose built for analytics. So we typically see, with databases, hey, there's different types of databases. You should use the right one for the right kind of purpose and for analytics. And if you want to process large amounts of data or, do aggregates and things like that, please don't use maybe your primary database that's used for uh, transactions. Maybe consider like a separate kind of database, either like a real replica of your more like traditional transactional database, or a specialized purpose built data warehouse like Redshift. Does that make sense, Jillian?
Yeah. Oh, it definitely does. Yeah, and similar to the kind of question before about advertising analytics, I mean, it's Redshift as an analytics, as a data warehouse. It can be used for. It doesn't matter if you're not in a fintech startup. You can definitely use it for your big, massive analytics needs. But yes, of course, with fintech, I mean, there's going to be a lot of data, and there's going to be a point in your startup journey where you're going to need a data warehouse. So definitely makes sense.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think the most exciting development with Redshift is, traditionally, you have Amazon Redshift, which is there's kind of the provisioned version, which you have to kind of configure the underlying infrastructure, provision the sort of right amount of capacity that's required for your data warehouse. But recently we released a serverless version. And yeah, for those not familiar with serverless, it's effectively saying that, hey, you don't need to worry about all those things anymore, like provisioning capacity and managing the underlying resources. And AWS will help scale the infrastructure for you. So yeah, we're seeing quite a bit of take up at the moment of Redshift serverless, just because now it's very easy to set up. You can go to the console. I think there's like 3 steps. It's literally like
Yeah.
create Redshift serverless, wait for the kind of the infrastructure to be set up, connected to your data source, and voila, you get sort of a this really scalable data warehouse ready for you to use, which is really, really powerful if you've got a whole bunch of data that you need to process and analyze.
100%. Yeah. Let's go through some recommendations to fintech startups based off of their different stages. So let's say a bootstrapped startup, or maybe they're have 1 to 10 people, and if they have raised, it's a maybe in the thousands, like low thousands, whatever your currency of choice, because I know we've got people all over the world. What maybe advice would you have to a startup that's at that stage, and that's specifically in fintech, based on maybe some common things that you see of challenges and areas that are of importance to them?
Yeah, I think if you're kind of just getting started and you're, at that sort of earlier stages, I think we talked about the startup security baseline before. So that's definitely a good resource that I would recommend getting started with, just to provide you with that kind of foundation around how you might set up your cloud. And given that resources in that early stage is quite I would say limited, potentially like even consider like more like low code no code options, or like something serverless, or something more automated in the AWS family of services, so that you can just focus on more the kind of product iteration rather than the underlying infrastructure. Um, Yeah, that's probably my probably two tips. Not sure what you're seeing, Jillian, in that
There's
space.
a yeah, that's really good. There's kind of a lot of wisdom that you shared there, because this is something that I see too. Is there are startups who uh, here's an example. A founder works at a big company, and then at this big company, they're like, you know what? I want to start my own startup. So they leave this big company where they were used to things being done a certain way, and they
Mm,
start to maybe come and start building their startup in AWS. Maybe it's a fintech startup as an example for this conversation. And they realize, oh, wait, like the infrastructure that I had or the setup that I had when I was a developer at some company, it's not the same here. And so they start to try to adopt some of the practices that they learned there, which is great, but the only trade-off is they don't have the supporting team and the supporting infrastructure to be able to, for example, build them out a full-fledged Kubernetes workflow, and with a bunch of DevOps. It's really just that one person who's just getting started, and maybe they have a contractor that they're also helping with. And so you might want to think differently in the beginning of, hey, should I use a low-code solution? Should I just maybe use serverless in the beginning? And of course, you can continue to use serverless because it's designed for scale. But think a little bit differently in the beginning, so you can really spend more time focusing on, is there a market? Does this market actually want my product? Maybe in fintech specifically, those regulatory hurdles might be the biggest challenge for you to be able to get your first couple of customers. So whatever you can do to focus of getting over that hurdle first uh, is going to make you more productive. And so, of course, choose the technology that's going to help you be more productive. Go ahead, Daniel. You're going to
yeah, that resonates quite a bit as well. There's definitely, a trap that you can fall into, especially if you're, coming from those larger enterprises where, there's a lot more kind of bells and whistles, and you come from, you take a startup environment, and really you should really focus on, maybe like fundraising or
Yeah,
those product market fit items that.
exactly. Yeah. Okay. So that's the startup that's in the beginning. Now let's say we've got the startup who's they're now over 10 employees to maybe hundreds of employees in the fintech space. What advice do you have for that startup based on maybe some things that you see?
Yeah, I think talking about security and compliance again, potentially that's at the stage where you do need those, formal kind of security certifications, formal, maybe even like a security person, or maybe like a security champion if there's not that dedicated person yet. So that's where you start looking at security architectures and setting up like a security operations potentially to look at the various security events that happen in the cloud. So you definitely, it's like you said, Julian, it's a definitely a journey. So you'd want to be making sure that you're consistently improving your capability, and that you have the roadmap to perhaps reach this kind of target architecture state. Doesn't have to be done all straight away, of course. You always have different priorities, but it's definitely something that is good to be proactive about. And again, event-driven architectures start to play potentially as you integrate with different partners, different APIs, or even expanding your engineering teams. And you need to be thinking about a way to ship quickly as you scale, and not be kind of bogged down by your a monolithic kind of application or infrastructure that startups typically start with. So that's where we're seeing a lot of take up in event-driven architectures. And then on the analytics side as well, start thinking about potentially, in the early stage, you might have like a read replica or just like your primary database. But definitely as you scale, that's where services like Redshift and other analytic services that AWS provides as well can be very helpful.
Those are great call outs. And I think, and I love what you were talking about earlier with security, because I think it's kind of worth going back to some of the talking points that we were saying earlier about security, since yes, it is really country specific in terms of security standards, but there are best practices. Like you said, the fintech lens, right, within the well architected, right? There's a
Yeah,
well architected paper.
there's
Go ahead.
definitely, I think you mentioned as well, like with AWS config, there's a set of conformance packs.
Oh, good call. Yes.
Yeah, with different um, uh, alignment to different security standards and frameworks. And there's a lot of them if you go to the documentation. So it can be quite overwhelming. But yeah, maybe check, other kind of financial services companies in your jurisdiction and see what standards they align to. There's definitely the international ones. So if you're operating a global, more like a global minded startup, things like SOC 2 or ISO 27001 is typically what people, what startups start with. And then, there's definitely specific subvertical even requirements like PCI and kind of payments, or in Australia here in financial services, we have a regulator called APRA that gets mentioned quite a bit as well. But I'm sure in the US, there's definitely different regulators that you need to comply with. That um, AWS config conformance packs can potentially help there. And yeah, with some of the more advanced security services like AWS Security Hub and Control Tower, we see that getting adopted by scale ups. There's also
Yes, that's
some
true.
pre-configured standards as well there that can help you get like a bit of a baseline to start your security journey.
Yeah, good call. And Patrick, another call out is also you should check out the Startup Security Baseline. It's, I would say, a set of best practices within AWS that's agnostic of industry. So you start a fintech startup, you'll still want to use it. We had someone earlier who was an advertising startup. You still want to use the startup security baseline. It's really just around AWS account and infrastructure best practices that you want to check that out. Um,
Yeah, and I
so
love the baseline because it's kind of like as a startup, you need to have a bit of like an 80 or 20 80 20 or 20 80 approach where yeah, I love the baseline. I think it was released only in May last year. And
yeah,
um, yeah, it's definitely a distillation of all the kind of learnings that AWS have had with working with startups, compressed into this sort of one guide. And by implementing those controls, you're sort of covering a majority of the security risks in your AWS setup. So definitely recommend the baseline.
yeah, fantastic. So Patrick, great question. Thank you. And there's another one I definitely want to call out, of course. Ade Florin. I really hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So does AWS offer solutions architects to help design the architecture for startups as part of their support plans? So if if you go into AWS, either you can open a support case, or even if when you're looking at, let's say, a blog post or reading something on the AWS website, there should be a contact us form on different pages across the website. Maybe on some newsletters, there are contact us forms. If you fill that out, there are people who look at them and you can say, I want to talk to a solutions architect to be able to help me with my architecture. And that's a great way of being able to get a with an architect. If you live near New York City, near San Francisco, I'm not sure if there are other startup lofts around the world. I just know that those are ones that have lofts where we have solutions architects and we have events at those lofts. They're fantastic. It's startup solutions architects will do different types of workshops. We'll do talks. We have networking events, and those are also great places where you can go in and bring your questions to related to helping you.
Yeah, we have the loft here as well down
Oh,
under in
cool.
Australia. So
Nice.
it's part of the APJ. So I think we're part of the Asia Pacific and kind of Japan region. And we don't have like I think you guys have like a physical loft, right? Like you can
Yeah, it's a physical
actually
loft.
go
Yeah.
in. Yeah, we have like a virtual one. So solutions architects such as myself will typically log some time there, and we offer office hours to make sure we're covering all startups that are building on AWS. And yeah, we do love engagement on that front, like especially at the early stages, so we can make sure that you're building it in the right direction. Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a really good blog post as well. I think it might work with you, Julian, by Justin Plug.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's called the Meet Your AWS Account Team,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. I think it's a fantastic blog post around how you can engage AWS not only for solutions architects, but kind of the broader startup ecosystem from account managers and business development as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, great question. These were great questions, everyone. So thank you so much for joining. We've got, again, we do this every single Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. UTC, 4 a.m. in Australia. What's the time zone so I can get that right? Daniel, what's
Yeah,
the name
it's
of
actually just approaching 4 a.m. now. So I think we started
it?
at
3?
3 a.m.
Oh my God, 3
Maybe
a.m.
there was some, yeah, I think, I'm not sure. Ben Duncan,
Props to you
your
for starting at
previous
3.
Aussie guest, he, I think, started at, yeah, 4 a.m. So maybe there's some daylight savings.
Yeah, we do daylight savings. I don't ask why we still do daylight savings. But we have more topics coming up. I want to share with all of you what the next topics are in the next coming weeks. April 18th, we have CTO time and tech prioritization. This is from a former CTO. Actually, he still is a CTO, but also works at AWS as well, giving you some tips on that. We're going to be talking about compliance on Tuesday, April 25th. I'm sure that's pretty much everyone really has to, I'm sure at some point has to think about that. So that's a great one to come to. And then on May 2nd, we've got migrations. That was a really popular one that we did a couple of months ago. So we've got, if you saw that one, Andrew Hopper is going to get, and we'll do a part 2 of that. If you missed the first one, and even if you missed any of the other ones that we've done for AWS On Air Startup, all of the actual posts on LinkedIn, if you look back in the LinkedIn feed of AWS, you'll find all of the other on airs that we've done in this format for AWS On Air Startup. So check that out. And of course, you can always just message me on LinkedIn if you have any topics related to startups that you want to learn about. Because really, we do this because we want to help you. We want to help you build your startup in AWS, whether you're someone that's maybe planning your escape at a company that you work at, or you're already working in a startup, or you have your startup and you want to be able to start scaling it. We see all startups at all different stages of their business and help them along the way. And we've got the next one that's coming on AWS On Air on this channel, if you stick around, is Lockdown. Kyle is awesome. He's a security specialist SA, and he's going to be talking about security. He's just really fun and entertaining. So definitely stick around and listen to him. He'll be showing up in 4 minutes on this channel. And that's really it. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, hanging out with us, posting questions in the chat, and I can't wait to see you next week. Daniel, you are an absolute trooper for getting up at 3 a.m. to do this with people. I mean, that is some serious love for startups. I respect you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Julian. And yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to engage with everyone. It's sort of it's probably my first time doing this. So I really appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, I think you've got a great program going. So definitely, yeah, for you guys kind of watching this around the world, please, yeah, follow Julian as well on social media and stay tuned with the AWS on air program. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. See ya.
Thank you.